Palace of Versailles, about a 30-minute drive outside of Paris, is one of the most magnificent buildings in art history. The historical significance of Versailles, along with its incredible French Baroque architecture, make this piece a must-see. If this is your first time to this channel, I'm Mrs. Alder and I'm obsessed with art history. I release art history videos every Thursday. If you want to get notified of these videos, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon off to the side. To understand the opulence of this place, we gotta understand the guy who built it, King Louis XIV. Now this guy was obsessed with himself. Seriously. He made people call him the Sun King because he thought the earth revolved around him. The day began and ended with Louis. He ended up ruling for 72 years in absolute power. He's even been known to say, "L'état, c'est moi," which means the state, it is myself. Which basically means I am France. Everything French is a reflection of me. He ruled politics, the elite class, art, and culture. Now, having this big of a head needed to be matched with his surroundings. The palace at the Louvre was not big enough for him. This little chateau began as a hunting lodge, a vacation home of sorts, before it was transformed into the mini city we know today. It cost somewhere between $2 billion and $300 billion, which, yes, I know that is a huge range, but records don't actually tell us, but billions of dollars. This place was large enough to house 5,000 aristocrats and over 14,000 servants. The facade, or exterior, is quite simple compared to what's inside. But like St. Peter's, this palace draws you in, arms open wide. It is done in a pretty classical yet more austere manner. It is horizontally composed, it's balanced, symmetrical, and repetitive. At the center of this palace is the king's bedchamber. Surprise, surprise. The rays of sun hit his bedroom first, awakening the Sun King for a new day. The rest of the world could wake up after the king. This was such an event that the king required an audience each morning he woke up. There were literally hundreds of honorable people in his room each morning, and depending on your social status, you had certain duties. It was considered a high honor to empty the king's chamber pot, or to remove his nightshirt, or to buckle his shoes. Depending on your rank and status in court, you were assigned certain menial jobs. This was actually quite clever of the king. He could keep an eye on all of the aristocrats while they fought amongst themselves, trying to figure out who was the one that was going to wipe the king's. Louis's entire life was a spectacle, and the interior of this palace was decorated to match it. There are 700 rooms, 2,153 windows, and 67 staircases, covering 721,182 square feet of floor space. That's over 12 football fields. Built on an east to west axis, there's a chapel, apartments, and even its own opera house. All of the finest materials were used. Expensive marbles for the walls, glass imported from Venice for the mirrors, and lavish paintings on every surface, including the ceilings. Most of the art reflected a motif of power. Louis in company with Greek gods, busts of him staring at you wherever you go, victorious battles, and everything was covered in gold or silver. This is the Apollo room, or the royal throne room, for Louis XIV, and it's very Baroque. Remember, drama, intensity, over the top. The most infamous room in this palace is the Hall of Mirrors. Hundreds of years after Louis XIV built this, a very important document was signed here, the Treaty of Versailles, which ended the First World War. This basilica-like barrel-vaulted hallway overlooks the gardens from the second floor for 250 feet. The Hall of Mirrors is the perfect representation of Baroque architecture. Used as a reception hall, this room is full of dramatic movement and dramatic scale. Every surface is decorated in a way to impress, inspire, and intimidate. There is this harmonious balance of organic yet geometric shapes. Everything is covered in either gold or silver, the ceiling is painted, and there are motifs everywhere of civil and military achievements of King Louis. The barrel vaulted hallways tend to feel like tunnels, so in order to alleviate that feeling, mirrors were placed on the opposing side of the windows to reflect the gardens, making the room feel wider and larger and more impressive. Mirrors were used as a way to manipulate light and the way you saw things. Glass at this time was one of the most expensive materials that were being made, and Venice had a monopoly over this. King Louis XIV entices a bunch of Venetian mirror makers to create the 357 mirrors that encompass this room. Legend says while these men were creating these mirrors, they were followed by the government and not allowed to leave the city on threat of death. Let's head outside to the gardens. This is my favorite part of the palace. King Louis envisioned a park for himself. He wanted a place to play and relax and have fun. So a park is what he got. He got more than a park. His gardens cover over a mile in width and almost twice that in depth. There are 2,000 acres of cultivated land, 50 fountains, 200,000 different trees. This is an incredible feat in and of itself. But what makes this more crazy is the park was originally a swamp, and many workers died of malaria. The design of the gardens are done in your traditional French style. Everything is highly manicured. We have great topiaries, and nothing is out of place. There is symmetry and harmony in the scrolls, the perfectly shaped topiaries, and the many fountains filtered throughout. Manicured lawns were a way to display how much land you owned. It's a way to brag about how much land you can play with without having to cultivate it to make a living. This practice actually continues today. Just drive around your neighborhood and see how many folks are outside mowing their lawns. Scattered throughout the hundreds of acres of lands are hidden surprises. Classical sculptures, grottos, a zoo, an orangerie with exotic plants and trees, intimate temples, and even a tiny village you could play in. The floral arrangements had the same job as the interior of Versailles: amaze the viewers. They were changed out daily, and the aromas that they gave off often made visitors quite sick. The grounds house 372 statues, 55 water features, 600 fountains, and over 20 miles of water pipe. There are 2 huge reflection pools that reflect the facade of the palace, having the same effects as the Hall of Mirrors. There are a few issues with these water features, though. Versailles was higher in elevation and not close to a water supply, so there was not enough water to supply these fountains. To combat this issue, fountains were turned on when the king walked by and turned off when he left. This is an example of one of the hundreds of fountains in Versailles. It is Apollo riding his chariot, bringing up the sun for the day. When this fountain is turned on, the effect is breathtaking, as the sun god literally rises from the pool. One of the main attractions of the gardens is the famous Hamlet village built for Marie Antoinette in 1783. Now, she was married to King Louis XIV's grandson, so she lived there quite a few years after, but this village was built for her. The village is an eclectic cabin-like place where she would play at raising animals and living a more simple life. There are 12 structures originally, but only 10 remained, and they stand in a Normandy village style. You have a farmhouse, a dairy, a mill, a boudoir, a pigeon loft, a lighthouse tower, a small pond for fishing, and a cottage with a billiard room for the queen to entertain her guests. Literally, in this palace's backyard is an actual village that is out of control. So basically, Versailles was a huge power play. It was a way for the King of France to flaunt his money, hold tight to his power, and intimidate anyone who came into his presence. This makes it a little bit easier to understand when, in October of 1789, a group of 7,000 women marched up to Versailles and took the king with them back to Paris, beginning the French Revolution. If you're curious about what happened to Versailles after the French Revolution, the royal family obviously never returned to Versailles. It was actually turned into an art museum, and it has its own gallery there today. The French court still sometimes uses it for large events, like when Queen Victoria came to visit France, but for the most part, it remains as a tourist attraction. In fact, in the year 2017, there were over 7.6 million visitors. If you'd like to see how the Palace of Versailles fits within the larger picture of art history, you can download my condensed timeline of Western art history. If you found this video helpful, go ahead and click the like button. Please comment below with any questions, suggestions, comments. Also remember to subscribe. We'll see you guys next time, where the art just keeps getting better.